Ken, as we will start in a few seconds, could you please take your seats? Continuing with our session on EduRoam and related challenges that it has, here is our last session for today. Under the question of who is there, we continue, as I said, speaking and talking about the EduRoam. And our first speaker is Jan Furman from Sasnett, Czech Republic. And he will provide ourselves an interesting thoughts about what could happen or what is the problem, what are the issues, challenges about overlapping EduRoam networks in different organizations. So, Jan, please.
Thank you. So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jan Furman, and I work for Sasnett company, which is an academic network operator in Czech Republic. And my talk has the name Overlapping EduRoam Networks operated by different organizations. So, here's the agenda of my talk. At the beginning, I will provide some information about potential problems with deployment wireless networks in campuses where is more than one organization. And after that, I will propose some possible solution of these problems, especially the one which is based on unified wireless solution from Cisco company. And after that, I will propose or show some case study from Sasnett and from our campus, and the last 2 points are summary and questions. So, as an introduction, please imagine some campus where is more organizations which are different, for example, many universities or so on, and each from this organization would like deploy its own wireless networks, wireless structures. So, in ideal situation, there will be no disturbance between these wireless networks in the campus, but it's very hard to ensure this because if many wireless networks are in one area, there is problem with some overlapping channels and some problems with radio channel assignments and so on. Because in very common Wi-Fi technologies like .11b and .11g, we have only 11 channels, but only 3 of them are without overlapping. So from deployment some wireless networks, we have only 3 channels which are non-overlapping. So ideal situation will be between no disturbance between wireless networks, and also optimal usage of radio channels and hardware should be ensured in this space. And transparent roaming should be ensured between organizations, but it's no problem for us because we have EduRoam, so this roaming system can work for us for this point. So potential problems with deployment in these areas as some campuses where is many organizations is radio management, especially radio channel assignment and interferences between radio channels. Because as I already said, we have only 3 channels which are non-overlapping. Also, one of the most very complicated problem is network management, especially if some organization has a big amount of access points. It's very complicated because some small configuration changes means network administrator must log in some access point, do some changes, and again and again, if the access points are in numbers of hundreds or something like that, it's a very problematic part. And the worst one is problem with overlapping different networks, but which has the same SSID. For example, the EduRoam with our example. So this situation will end with flapping clients and with loss of connectivity. I will describe it on next slides. So this problem is well known and is also mentioned in the EduRoam roaming policy document. There is also proposed some solution, but this solution is not ideal, and I think it can be solved by a better way. So the possible There is problem because I have no picture. Okay. Possible solution 1 is proposed on a roaming policy document and is based on do some extensions to the SSID. So the SSID of the network is not EduRoam, but for example EduRoam Sasnett. So if 2 networks are so if we have 2 EduRoam networks, they should be indicated by different SSIDs. It's easy to implement and it solves our problem, but the beauty of transparent roaming is lost because the SSID is different and the client must do some configuration changes on these devices. So this is not ideal solution, as well as the second one, which is based on single WLAN, which is deployed across whole campus. And this solution is working, but it's not ideal. It doesn't solve the problem of flapping client completely, because in case the client is jumping from access point of one organization to access point to second organization, it will be must again authenticate itself and connect it to internet and request IP address, but the client will got the IP address which is same. So in this case, the client can continue to communicate, but it takes only for 3 or 5 seconds. The best solution is the last one, which is based on Cisco wireless controllers. And this one is a little bit complicated. So for the first one, I will describe some benefits and drawbacks of this solution. After this, I will describe how it works. So the main benefits of this solution is fast handover between access points, which is ensured by controller. And this handover can take around 50 or 100 milliseconds in ideal solution, but in real types it's around 3 seconds, because there are some problems with fast secure roaming, as I will say in a couple of minutes. So this solution is effective, is also effective because management of big amounts of access points is done by the wireless controller. So it means when some network administrator would like do some changes, it will do it only on central box on wireless controller. It's not necessary log to each access point and do it on each device. So wireless LAN controllers also provides automatic control of radio parameters because all parameters like channel assignments on transmit powers are controlled by these devices. So this is ends with optimal coverage and optimal transmit powers on each device. Because the wireless controller has information from each access point, he can also detect rogue access points, which are in networks by some hackers added or so on. And this solution completely solves problem of flapping client, because roaming between access points in the scope of this controller is absolutely transparent and fast. So this is a solution for our problem. But also drawbacks are in this solution, and there's a high cost of wireless controllers, and they think that this solution is proprietary. There is also another central solutions provided by many other vendors, but we have no practical experience with this. So in this presentation is mentioned only the Cisco solution. So here is a picture which describes the unified wireless solution from Cisco, and two main building blocks are wireless controller, which is the blue box on the right side of picture, and LWAP access points. The LWAP access points are common Cisco wireless access points, but with different software. We can use, for example, 11 or 1200 series, but it's necessary to convert it from iOS version to lightweight version. But Cisco provides a small piece of software which can do it a very easy way. So all LWAP access points are connected to wireless controller via LWAP tunnel. LWAP is a protocol which transports all information from controller to access points and also traffic between access points and controller. And these access points are relatively stupid devices which can only transmit and receive radio signals, and all radio frames are transported via LWAP tunnel to the controller. So every packet forwarding and so on are ensured by controller. So LWAP tunnel can be based on layer 2 or layer 3 network systems. So the access point should have only IP connectivity, and they will establish the LWAP tunnel to the controller. So on this picture is a small overview of roaming between two access points which are under control of one controller. This is without problems because the access points have full information from one controller. So this roaming is absolutely transparent and free. But with this solution is also transparent and free roaming between access points which are under control of different controllers, which is depicted on this picture. So if client will be handed over from access point B to access point C, the controller 2 will establish the tunnel to the controller 1, which is the first controller where the client was associated for first time. So in case of fast secure roaming, what is a feature of Cisco, this should be ensured in times between 50 to 100 milliseconds. But there is some implementation problem because there is prerequisites for fast secure roaming, and this is functional only in case that client supports Cisco wireless extensions, CCX. But no every client support this. So for example, Linux clients doesn't support this, so they cannot use fast secure roaming. But in case there is, let's say, ordinary roaming is in play, this roaming can take about 3 seconds. So it's not so bad, and you can use roaming also without the fast secure feature. So here is a picture of connection between controllers. In case that each organization in campus has its own controller, these controllers can be connected to one mobility group. And the benefits is clear because clients can move around all campus, which is connected with one IP address and can use transparent roaming around whole campus. So here's a picture of a couple of controllers, a couple of hardware. They are scaled by numbers of access points which can be accommodated by each controller. The smallest one is 106 controller. It's on the central side of picture, which can accommodate 6 access points. It's not so many, but for any cases it could be useful. The controllers which are left top side is for 400 series, and these controllers can accommodate from 12 to about 100 access points. And the top-end controller is the wireless service module, which is on the right top side. It's a blade to catalyst switches 6500, and this one can accommodate for 300 access points. What is very information is the cost of these controllers, because it's relatively expensive, I think. The controller for 25 access points cost around 7,000 euro, and the controller for 100 access points cost around 17,000 euro. It's a very high cost level, I think, but it's digressive. So if you can buy a controller for 300 access points, it will be a little bit cheaper maybe. So here is a slide about Sasnett case study. In our campus is 6 organizations, which has each of them has its own controller, and these controllers are connected together to one mobility group. And it means that transparent roaming is ensured in all area of our campus. It's one transparent roaming space. And we have in all campus only one backup controller because it saves money and is sufficient for our purposes, I think. So it means if controller in any organization will be down, access point from this organization will reconnect via internet to our backup controller, and EduRoam and the radio network can continue to working. But of course with different IP addresses and different configuration, but it's useful for users that they can continue to work. So radio coverage around all campus is optimal because it's centrally controlled by mesh of controllers, and each controller has information about traffic on radio and radio signals from each other. So they will make some model of radio coverage, and after that they will make the channel assignment and transmit powers. So we have very good practical experience with this solution because it's working, but as I already said, it without fast, secure roaming because it's not supported on every client. So here is a small summary of my talk. I described problems with overlapped EduRoam networks with one campus. There is many organizations, and also describe some possible solution, especially the one with unified wireless solution based on Cisco solution. I'm very sorry because this version of slides, it's very preliminary. I have the new one, which is not at core, I think, now. So many pictures and many schemas are not in this presentation. I'm already a little bit problematic. So it's everything from me. If you have any question, I will try to answer. It's not so easy.
First, thank you, Jan. There is
how many SSIDs or networks did you configure for them? Did all of these organizations around that one campus has one for internal use, or did you just converge to EduRoam or something like that?
On each organization is EduRoam, which is common SSID, but every organization usually have its own SSID. For example, Sasnett is it's a local SSID Sasnett, but it's only local on the organization. EduRoam is common around all campus.
Okay, I'm Marco Sommani from CNR in Italy. As far for the EduRoam SSID, do all controllers point to the same radius servers, or every organization has a different one? And in case the servers are different, does this affect roaming in some way, or it works well anyway?
Okay, good question. It was on my picture, which is not here. Each organization has its own radio server, and they are connected to EduRoam, of course. And in case of roaming, the client still has its own IP address. So in ideal case, the only one radius or authentication request is for the first radio server. So no other authentication requests are in play.
So right now you have this working where all of the universities are running their own WISMs, and we're very familiar. We run 12 WISMs at UBC, so we know the pain. But do you know if it would work if you had different vendor products? Do you know if there's any agreement yet between the various wireless vendors, so that if you had the central solution of Cisco as well as 3Com as well as, do you know if they are able to interoperate?
Interoperability is a problem, but it's not in our campus because all organizations are Cisco-based, so we have no problem with this.
Some more questions? If not, then thank you, Jan. Our next speaker is Kari Huhtanen. From Tampere University of Technology, Finland, who will give us a talk on how to use the EduRoam, not the service, but rather the technology for building wireless communities. So, EduRoam Beyond.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Kari Huhtanen. I'm from Tampere University of Technology. I'm a researcher there, and I'm also leading my own small consulting company called Artred. Well, I kind of start by telling why EduRoam is nice and why we actually did chose and recommend it as a base of the community network that was built in Tampere. The EduRoam architecture is based on open standard interfaces, so there is no this kind of vendor dependency or lock-in. You don't have to buy all the hardware or even the software from single vendor. You just have nice, clean, open and standard interfaces you utilize with practically every enterprise-grade vendor's hardware. EduRoam is also nice because it doesn't require building and deploying yet another Wi-Fi network. Instead, the kind of existing networks, the same networks, can be used in organizations, and the same network can be used also for organization employee and visitor access for both of the users there. This is because, at least in the bigger companies and using this kind of enterprise-grade hardware, you can use this, for example, dynamic wireless LAN switching there with this technology. It's also secure enough. This WPA and WPA2 is quite sufficient for securing the radio network. And what I mean that it's enough for securing radio network is that the encryption there is enough to protect this kind of privacy issues and stuff like that. But obviously if you mix, for example, visitors and employees in the same network, you should have some more protection like with VPNs and firewalling into employee laptops to secure them and connect to the company's network. EduROM is also this kind of cooperative model. Every organization participates to the network development and maintenance, as well as providing the coverage and even resources. What I mean by this is that if we think about this kind of other community networks which start in a way that city decides to build a network, they kind of build and deploy a very large network, buy new access points, and just put their network on top of all other networks that are already existing in the city. EduROM in an architectural way is different in that sense that you actually convert your existing network to work as this kind of extension of the coverage area. And because you use the same network as your kind of company network or organization's operational network, then you have a kind of incentive to keep that network working and in good condition. So the kind of maintenance and the development work for services and the network coverage is kind of distributed to all of these community members instead that there is one operator or one company trying to put the network there where its business interests are. And also the EduROM development, it's very active and it's also done this kind of in cooperative way by the EduROM community. There has been a lot of this kind of issues related to roaming that has administration, maintenance, that has already been solved in EduROM, but there is no point in trying to solve them again in the commercial world. Well, the EduROM is nice, but there are some issues. Actually, there was in last year's Terena, there was Josh Howlett's presentation, which was pretty good, and most of these issues here are the same that were on his slides also. Deploying this kind of EduROM type architecture, it requires considerable networking and terminal configuration skills, as well as this kind of other resources, time, interest, and money. And these may be even scarce in these kind of commercial networks or community networks where there are companies, and kind of running the network isn't the network administrator's primary interest. It's just getting the work done and as quickly as possible. And because this requires this kind of considerable networking and terminal configuration skills, it is very easy to make mistakes and get frustrated and just forget the whole thing. It's not where the trouble is, might be one thing that comes from that. Then there is this WPA and WPA2 configuration. If you have ever tried to configure it in, for example, S60 phones, you know it's so difficult that you cannot actually tell the visitors that, okay, now we have this really secure guest network, but you have to configure yourself this WPA and WPA2 settings to your PDA, your laptop, or your mobile phone. What we actually found is that for this kind of visitors that have no interest in this kind of roaming and making the easy connections, that way, the standard web authentication or no authentication at all is kind of the only feasible way for them. Then questions kind of and issues and problems what we found actually doing this kind of deploying this community network was that what actually happens when an organization wants to connect both to the EduROM and other hierarchies. We have now two kind of default root servers there, one for EduROM and one for this community network. How to handle that via what kind of root server would authentication go and what realms are available in these two places. Because at least the standard eduroam configuration is that eduroam is the default route where you put all your unknown authentication results. And of course, the last thing on this slide, what happens when we actually bring the consumers and companies in the community? So we actually had to make a few policy decisions and made a few new components for the network. Some of these policy decisions were this kind of decisions that it actually helped a lot that in eduroam community there was on Terena mobility list a lot of discussions about this, and there was at least part of the issues, there were already this kind of convergence that this should be go this way. One of these kind of issues was the WPA1 authentication or WPA2 authentication. If we think about the regular users like consumers and the company users, we cannot really say that, okay, you need this kind of encryption with this kind of standard and you need this kind of combination. They don't actually understand these things. So what we decided in that network was that we should stick to this basic things like WPA, WPA2, because they were kind of standard. They were kind of this kind of brands from the Wi-Fi alliance that you could go to, for example, to shop and say that I need a WPA enterprise-capable access point. And this way you would get the correct hardware and don't have to learn about the encryption stuff and all this kind of very annoying, difficult technical stuff. Also, why we wouldn't use eduroam, or we couldn't use eduroam, was that eduroam does not, of course, allow commercial partners, companies, and of course we also needed more neutral brand for the community there. Eduroam is more like an education network, and then we actually had to make another brand for the community network. From this kind of EAP methods, this kind of technology stuff related to WPA authentication, at least for the infrastructure components, EAP was chosen as the common EAP method. We actually chose this because most of the supplicants in terminals, they already have this method there by default. EAP TTLs is in some terminals, but it's not in all, so it's much easier to instruct people to configure just the one that is available in almost every terminal. Also, this kind of issue with PKIs, we chose their well-known CA. Tautet was chosen to sign the infrastructure certificates because it's also easier for users to configure their terminal just to click one checkbox there and say that Tautet can be used for securing this kind of a server certificates. The captive portal authentication was allowed, but it was kind of recommended only for this kind of temporary visitor access. And one thing we couldn't actually require because of the differences in access point implementation and VLAN hardware implementation was that radius accounting information, we couldn't exactly require this because we had to get this kind of consumer access points like ADSL gateways, wireless gateways to work with the whole system. Also, to kind of ease the deployment of this eduroam in certain places, we had to make a few extra components like consumer authentication server, small to medium enterprises authentication server, and hotspot authentication server. And as a last thing, we had to make this kind of open source Wi-Fi access point, which I will come back in the next slides. So basically the architecture is pretty similar to the eduroam. There is a little less hierarchy there, but the idea is that we have in the middle of the slide there, this kind of roaming root radius server that works as a radius proxy for all of these realms. The difference between this network and the eduroam network was that we actually had this kind of, on the left side there, member of the multiple communities where, for example, TUT, UTA, and this kind of educational organizations that belonged to the eduroam and also wanted to participate in this wireless Tampere network. We also defined few SSIDs, actually two, wireless Tampere for this kind of web-authenticated Wi-Fi community network access, and Langaton VPA, which is the VPA-authenticated Wi-Fi community network. And Langaton meaning wireless in Finnish, so we try to select some kind of neutral brand there anyway. In wireless Tampere, there are few ways to join the community network, and the standard way is the one used quite a lot of in eduroam. It's just setting up your own radio server and then these SSIDs and connect them to the roaming root radio server. But because in the companies and at least with the consumers, we cannot expect that they would set up their own radio servers or even know how to maintain one. We actually needed to do few this kind of outsourced radio services for handling these. On the right side there on the top is the consumer authentication server. And this consumer authentication server is actually just a web interface to SQL database where the consumers can register their VPA enterprise-capable access points. They configure that one as their radio server, and in return they get a user account that works around the community network, and also this kind of user management interface for their own access point. And we got the consumer authentication server there working, and it's people have actually used it and connected and registered and get this way the roaming access to the whole network. But then we noticed that also companies need this one. Even if the radio server or the package to run it might not cost anything for them, except for, of course, the configuration effort or something small support effort there. They needed this kind of a ready solution where they can register their access points. So this kind of wireless Tampere member without own radio server, the green one there on the right, they use this kind of same method. The user interface is a bit different. There are more options of, for example, generating a lot of visitor accounts at the same time. But they basically register their radius-capable access points and controllers to the centralized company authentication server and gain this way the access to the network and at the same time a very nice user management solution. Okay, we got there. We got consumers, we got companies, we got educational organizations, and then we found out that actually if we think about this kind of small businesses like pubs, cafes, restaurants and stuff like that, they don't really want to use this kind of heavy controller-based solutions because they are just too much money spent into something that they don't really get any revenue of. So we had to kind of devise some kind of reasonably priced solution for deploying this kind of a wireless Tampere also in those places. And that's why we did have to invent the wheel a bit again, by building this kind of open source Wi-Fi access point firmware that would serve this web authentication network and also this WPA authenticated network for this kind of regular user access. And to support this kind of open source Wi-Fi APIs, we had to do this another component called hotspot authentication server. And well, in Wireless Tampere, the idea was that there would be very open standardized interfaces, like in EduRoam. So we built the whole thing on base of the OpenVRT and this kind of open source Captive portal software like Wi-Fi Dog, and just utilized regular radios for the WPA network there. We also met this kind of problems with the private networks, NAT and other connectivity disrupting stuff, and that's why we had to make this kind of the open source Wi-Fi IP to make first this kind of connectivity tunnel with OpenVPN between the APIs and hotspot authentication server. After that, you could deploy the access point even behind multiple NATs and get it still working there quite well. What we then managed to kind of achieve in this exercise was that Wireless Tampere is this kind of well, a bit different from at least some of the networks in that sense that it is a cooperative community network. I mean by this that we have also, in addition to this technological stuff, we had this kind of business focus in the whole thing. So in Wireless Tampere, there are multiple service and solution providers because there are open interfaces, so everybody can kind of implement their own packet solution and sell it to the users there in the network. They are working in cooperation in that they follow these standard interfaces and are monitored by this brand owner, the coordinator. And what we aim to do with this is kind of free and open competition. So if one vendor decides that we don't really like to offer our customers this kind of services or this kind of equipment, then some other may just come and, well, we offer and you can get the Wireless Tampere and connect it to also with these things. The same thing is, as in most of the community networks, the same thing is here. The companies, organizations, and home users participate by sharing their guest network bandwidth with the other community members, and that's the general idea the phone uses, VPs uses, and these kind of other community networks use. Standardized interfaces made it possible for them to utilize the existing infrastructure. We are talking about the big companies and organizations here. And the basic infrastructure costs in this model are covered by the company membership fees and the visitor user account sales. Each member maintains its own network, so no extra maintenance cost, at least for the coordinator, comes from that. And like in other community networks and also in EduRoam, the coverage gets bigger by combining already existing wireless networks and by deploying this kind of new solutions to the companies and organizations. What there was still remaining, or what things we have been now thinking about when we got the whole network deployed, is that one thing is identifying this clearly, that what is the correct balance between the benefits and costs to get organizations to participate to the community network. You don't want to participate if you find that you don't get enough benefits, for example, in the spared work time or these kind of issues. And the whole system must be balanced so that there will be this kind of correct balance between benefits and cost. And other is that what are the correct incentives to encourage and ensure participation in general, because there might be different incentives for this kind of consumer users, education users, and also the company users. We must kind of try to, by developing the network constantly, we have to find this way what are actually the incentives, why the people are using it. The next question. these are nice questions at nice conference, because I have kind of found out at least some possible answers from this conference to these things. Because if we think about the next question, how to make it easier to deploy cooperative services utilizing community network infrastructure, this is actually the same thing that also EduRoam and all these other federations and identity management is trying to figure out. And I'm very willing to listen what options could be utilized in this kind of scenario also when there are also this kind of commercial companies and consumers involved. And while Josh had this keynote yesterday, and also this kind of vertical stack integration, how to connect the network and service level, that's the kind of issues remaining future work also in this kind of community networks I'm presenting here. One of the issues I talked already something with Stig and Stefan Winters earlier was that how to handle this kind of organizations that are belonging to multiple communities and roaming between them. I don't expect that in the world there will be just one community where everybody is a member, so this might be this problem a bit larger than just related to this particular community network. Of course, then there are this improving monitoring, maintenance, usability, the things that Terena Mobility and a lot of guys there has been doing in EduRoam, and not to mention TN2008. Integrating new technology is always this kind of interest in this kind of community network. It's utilizing these kind of technologies like EAP methods like EAP SIM, EAP AKA, and mobile terminals, not to mention RADSEC and, for example, this DNS-based server discovery, peer-to-peer roaming. These kind of issues have to be evaluated and researched to see if they can be utilized in this network and make it better in some way. The idea is that never to stop developing the network, instead try to integrate more this kind of useful things to the architecture. And last but not least, opening and spreading the concept. The idea here is that we shouldn't always try to invent the wheel. I have to admit that in some cases we did it in wireless Tampere, but some of those issues were because we needed to get something really fast and really fit to that community network. But in conclusion of this presentation, and there is a more detailed paper also available, it is possible and feasible to utilize EduRoam architecture in building this kind of a wireless community network. But what we should actually do is more of this kind of cooperation and utilize the gathered feedback and develop a solution to improve also the base architecture, like, for example, EduRoam. This is what I mean by this is that most of these solutions done by NRENs and research networks, we should actually try to get them adopted also in the business world, because we can get there this kind of very useful feedback about how the solution could be made better, and maybe this kind of a more like usability and deployment issues that are important to those companies. And in kind of return, if they see that one technology is a very useful also in the business world, then they might adopt it, and because there is a bigger this kind of client base then in the business and also in the educational markets, then also the vendors are maybe getting interested to implement stuff developed in this kind of research environments. These community networks, in my opinion, should be developed cooperatively. developing the similar kind of services every time from the scratch for each community network, it takes such our resources from developing the actual services and components to improve the concept. So idea in this wireless Tampere community network is also that it's going to be open in that sense that you can borrow components for your own community network in your city and not having to do those components yourself. You can concentrate, for example, bringing location-dependent services or this kind of additions to the network. And when building these networks, it's useful to build them on open standards without this kind of service or solution provider lock-ins and this kind of control which makes it difficult to develop the concept and utilize it further. The same thing is actually the last thing there, that communities should not, in my opinion, try to build their own this kind of walled gardens. Instead, they should interact and interconnect, and like a word mentioned already, maybe too much cooperate between each other. Okay, that was my presentation. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Questions for Kari?
I'll just ask about it. Do you operate, is there any differentiation of service between the web page-based open service and the WPA-based service? Any quality of service terms or limitations?
Right. So,
can you repeat the question?
I can repeat
because
the question.
Jens cannot shout, so the whole internet can hear him. So.
Yeah. So the question was that was there any differentiation between this WPA and the web authenticated network? So, to, for example, encourage people to use some of these. Actually, there isn't. There isn't, at least in this model. It might be that it would be useful to, for example, set up that this web authenticated network would be just for web browsing, and then you could get better access by utilizing this WPA authenticated network. But currently there has not been this kind of differentiation there. Maybe one thing that is kind of encouraging to use the WPA is just when you change between access points, you don't have to every time load your web page and enter your username and password for the web browser there. You just keep the one WPA configuration as the regular users most surely do, and just let it device connect it by themselves.
Some more questions? Yeah?
I was wondering, how do you feel that you need to monitor this kind of community network? That if you have some user who is not following your acceptable use policy or are doing something bad or just stealing all the bandwidth, acting as a free rider there, how do you react on that kind of issues?
Okay. Okay, in that sense, we have the kind of same problems and same nice things than EduRoam has. That if, for example, we have a badly behaving user in some access point there, we can get that person authenticated if needed by, for example, police and so on. But this whole process goes through the whole hierarchy, and that's a bit difficult, but it can be made, and that's actually this kind of security enhancing thing in that sense that when you actually authenticate the wireless network, you are not so interested to do things there that are this kind of let's say evil things in the wireless network, because you know that you have been authenticated. But if you have this kind of completely fully open wireless network, you don't actually have even that kind of stair to climb or go over there.
Some more questions? If not, then thank you, Kari. Our last speaker is Philip Hansett from University of Tennessee, that is not in Europe. So we will hear about things like why eduroam is not flying off in United States. Philip.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for staying so late as well. I would like to give some credit to Charles Perrault. I may use him in my presentation, and he's the father of fairy tales. And maybe eduroam in the US is a sleeping beauty after all. So this is really the presentation. Why is eduroam not taking off in the USA? Well, why should you care? It's Europe. Well, as the speaker, Dr. Katz, noticed as well by traveling, he noticed that the world was flat. Also, the ratio dollar to euro is pretty good, or euro to dollars. You may travel quite a bit, so it would be a shame not to enjoy eduroam after all. And finally, well, I'm originally from Belgium, so it was the perfect place to do a presentation and see my family at the same time. So there is eduroam. Actually, we did an attempt, and we call it Federated Wireless Network Access. You can find more information on this website. So it's alive. We have documentation. We still have archives. They have been in dormancy, but they are there. We had people, and it was early on in 2004. We had a lot of people being in phone conference calls and sharing ideas. It was active. We even have an infrastructure. At the time, 2 top-level radio servers, redundancy. It was quite an infrastructure. In different places, we had diversity. Located at University of Tennessee and Merit Networks. Merit Networks actually invented radius with Livingston, so, not bad for a proxy radius architecture. We had connections. We were connected to APAN, Surfnet, and UniC, which were at the time the major top-level radio server or routes. And we still have one little server alive. No connectivity, though. And then, what happened with... Okay, FWNA went to sleep in the spring of 2007. The activities of the working group were in dormancy. We didn't decide to cancel it because we thought there could be new opportunities, but we don't meet anymore. We don't have our bi-weekly phone calls. So, really, why? Is it mechanical? Is it the people? What really put FWNA to sleep? Well, we definitely had some analysis paralysis. Early on, we had discussion, it's like, watch out, you don't want to advertise this service because if it's successful, we'll have to support this. And we really are here to discuss the idea and see how feasible it is. So a lot of discussions. We did end up, as I told you, with servers, but not really willing to go further on this. We actually had a fear of success, and mostly for support issues, because it's true that handle failure, you can do it. Handle success can be a big challenge. And there were the security issues. Radius is not secure, can be easily hacked. Also, we are not organized as much as Europe in NRANs. We don't have all these built-in hierarchies. Internet 2 is 200 plus research universities, but really there are more than 3,000 universities, and not many were represented in those phone calls. It was a lot of these research universities. So communicate with the rest of the world would have been quite a challenge. So that doesn't help for sure. And, you know, money helps. I mean, it's some of the ideas that we had, I will talk about later, could have used some funding. We definitely didn't pursue that. We got minimal support, I have to be honest. The servers and some of the hours were provided by Internet too, so that part of the development was funded. And eventually, I think we lost interest. Internet 2 lost interest in FWNA because you can talk the talk, but eventually you have to walk the walk and come up with something that produces a service. Even if it's experimental, you need to see activity on the service. And the participants themselves the number of participants on the phone calls were diminishing over time. I don't have a graph that represents that because I didn't take counts, but I'm sure it was important. So, really, we had FWNA, and I think we should take a big leap and really move to EduRoam, the true European version of, you know, by the way, Sleeping Beauty, which is La Belle au Bois Dormant. Hopefully not asleep this time. And what do we think could hamper EduRoam's adoption in the US? Well, is there demand? Because usually, you know, it's good to provide a service, come up with something smart, but if there is no demand, you will not have much success. So the lack of demand could definitely kill this. But the presentation from Portugal there was really showing some tremendous success. So I think that those slides will end up, I think, on my office door eventually, at least the graphs, because those were good news. So, and at the time, in 2004, when we started it, not many people were doing 802.1x. Today, it's definitely changing, and 802.1x is a definite challenge for visitor access. So, but if people don't adopt 802.1x, there is not much business in doing EduRoam, or at least it's in its 802.1x version. Will it solve really the visitor access? Because on our campus at University of Tennessee, the visiting scientist is a minority. What we really see is conference people. They are not from higher education. They are not even from K-12, which is the elementary, high school, and middle school. And we have a lot of sport fans. And you might not have that here, but in the US, when you give service, we provide services like visitor access, they tend to do donations for sport activities and even sometimes educational activities. So supporting these people is important. And if EduRoam cannot solve that, well, we are really not covering what we need to cover, which is visitor access. Covering just the scientific community might not be enough. And really, these days, we have solutions that I think it was someone from Sun Microsystems way back when that told me the problem is that we have solutions that are just good enough. And, you know, other solutions that can be more sexy cannot really make it because the just good enough are taking over. And web access with a portal does work. It doesn't provide everything, but it does work. And there is definitely an issue, talking with class, that long-distance support of EduRoam, I wrote this, the success of EduRoam diminishes with the number of time zones you cross. Well, definitely. You don't want to call your Australian help desk when they're asleep. That can really destroy some of your roaming. What really needs EduRoam to succeed. Those were the negative points. Let's see could we find a prince? On the client side, if we want to adopt it in the US, it would be nice, as Matthew actually showed, to make the 802.1x client a little more convenient. And when I think about convenience, I think about the modern days of using a modem, or, well, when we used to use a modem. PPP, if you remember the early days of PPP, you have to script, you have to put commas, you have to put all kinds of information on PPP. It reminds me of actually the modern 802.1x clients, a lot of complexity. It would be nice if even the OpenSea project could make it as easy as PPP. Username, password, don't ask me about too many things. Maybe at the domain, and then you move on with your life and you join the network. Well, I know in Europe it's not so easy to get a certificate because what I understand, actually Stefan Winter told me that he has to take his certificate from his NREN, so you might not have the luxury to get an eduroam US certificate, but or an eduroam.it or PT certificate, but I think we can definitely get that, and it would definitely help to authenticate the infrastructure because 802.1x does not help in that sense. If you want to know that you're on the access point that talks to the radio server that's routing you to a certificate that you know, you might have a reassurance that you're on the right infrastructure. People have talked about it. Kerry mentioned that in his presentation. It would definitely be good to have some commercial mixing because, you know, the business world really is the driving force. And if we could trade some hotspot services, we might really get the community interested. But there is a caveat. We really need to convince these guys to use 802.1x. And I don't think that's something that's going to happen very soon. This is a big one. We have been requested at University of Tennessee to implement a NAC. The CIO said, I want a NAC. Work on this. That was very perturbing because it involves a lot. You know, there are many vendors providing NAC solutions, but when you think about visitor access and NAC, there is a problem. And in our discussion list, actually, Steve Carmody from Brown University came up with a scheme, which is Radius SAML. And I think it could really help the visiting access if you think about NAC and Radius SAML in the context of eduroam. Why? Well, if I think about visitor access, I can give access from a web portal to my user, to my visitor, regular, you know, sport fans, sorry, and conference people. But it will definitely be a limited access because I don't know much about them, and I don't expect these people coming for a day or 2 hours sometimes, some vendors, to really go to a full poster assessment. It would take probably longer than just the time they're staying. So, but in the scheme of eduroam, if we could use some assertions and know about the status of your machine, you can really have an edge there and immediately join the network based on maybe the NAC you had done yesterday, or do a minimal NAC. So there's definitely a big advantage to doing such a thing in the case of eduroam. And I think this would be the survival of eduroam, or actually probably the boosting part of eduroam. It's to come up with such a scheme. I added a little thing because it's, you know, sometimes you don't know where everything is, and so I don't know in Europe, but in the US, if you type on Google Maps, where is, you know, IHOP, International House of Pancake, if you're in a location, it will show all the dots where IHOP is located. I first thought it a little geeky, and actually I've been using quite a lot lately, especially on those iPhones things. So it would be nice to find your eduroam networks the same way. Of course, you first have to join eduroam before you find eduroam. It might be you may use your iPhone first to find your eduroam using the 3G network. So on the provider side, because it's nice to take care of the clients, but I think there is also a whole section of eduroam that concerns the people that are handling all these services in the background. So what I think could boost maybe the service would be the whole presentation of Stefan. You know, it would make put people at ease. You know, it would simplify the whole exchange of shared secret between root servers, participants. I mean, that's definitely a thing that I think should be done. And many of the presentations, by the way, we have seen today were all they are starting to go in the same direction. You know, the simplification of ISO 2.1x client, the RADSec. This is really encouraging. The documentation for Radius proxy. You cannot ask all these small places to be Radius experts. And so us, I think, working groups, us big research universities, or maybe Terina, Internet 2, should really work on the documentation and make the process easier. Because you do have to put some access list on your Radius server. You might not want, you know, that enemy university on the side to join yours. So how do I ban them from my network? That's not something to underestimate, but hopefully you don't want to help them in that aspect. But you know, help in the documentation, help in the configuration is not something to underestimate. And of course, there are so many flavors of Radius servers that it is even more challenging. Another part, which is the administrative layer of access list, is pre-configure MOUs. When people sign between each other, you know, we are often. It's like Matthew was saying. Does someone want to write the documentation? Yes. Would you mind writing an MOU for me? Well, having a pre-configure MOU where you just have to put your name, put the things that you agree on, you know, a little signature, and we move on would be nice. To build a trust fabric. I repeat the eduroam.us certificate because it will help also provider, not only clients, to recognize the infrastructure, but it will definitely help the server people. You know, making certificate purchases is not always an easy task. I mean, we deal with that at the university, and I have to admit that we have not found yet a nice path to do that. And in order to boost the adoption of eduroam, the way we did it was really, you know, to have a bunch of top universities talking about FWNA, talking about eduroam, and trying to do presentation at conferences and try to have people come to you. Well, that didn't seem to work. Is it because there was no interest, or is it because, you know, not everyone is listening to Terina conferences or Internet 2 conferences? You know, so you may grow that organically, you know, bottom up. You build a regional eduroam, and you grow that as a seed, and eventually, you know, build it and they will come. Might happen. Again, back to the Portugal example, they do that between their universities. It seems to work very well. And having Internet 2 support to spread those seeds would be nice. So there is something yesterday while I was thinking about eduroam, I thought, you know, this is really this is standardization, and there is a paradox to this eduroam.us thing. It's just a remark, actually. It's not so much, you know, when you go to the US, wherever you go, you can find AT&T. It's a nationwide network. I pay the same price. I don't have to worry about anything. I don't have these roaming fees, like when I'm in Belgium, for instance. Though it's, I mean, you have GSM, but you pay all these roaming fees. In the US, you can cross the entire continent and stay on the same provider if you have a big provider. You can find the same hotel chain. And often, you can find the same identical food no matter where you go. So it's very standardized. It's very convenient. And though, in Europe, well, you can find the same education SSID, and I think that's about it. I think the tracks are about the same width maybe, but standardization is not something that they seem to enjoy. So that would be the conclusion, I think, is that how come we don't have such a thing? Voilà.
Thank you, Philip. I wish you, or not you, your sleeping beauty to find a nice prince eventually. Just to let you know, and I think it's not a public knowledge, but inside the eduroam service activity, we do plan to publish quite soon a Google map with eduroam hotspots across. But our idea is to make it not even Google dependable. There is some database behind it, and at this very moment it's not so much populated, but there will be one. So, and now with the questions, Stefan was first. Sorry.
Yes, Stefan Winter, Restina. The Google Maps map has already been mentioned, yes, but we are also doing stuff on this side of the provider side that you mentioned. We are writing cookbooks about configuration of your devices, and also how to set up a service provider, pretty much procedural, so that when you read it thoroughly and implement the steps one after another, you should be able to set up a service provider just like that. When it comes to Memorandum of Understanding, we do have a common policy for NRENs within Europe that want to participate, and we are currently working on a Memorandum of Understanding for peering with other confederations. So all of this is actually in the works. And when it comes to eduroam.us certificate authority, well, just do it. You can have your CA just as you like.
This is really ask it and I shall provide, yes? Excellent.
There is one question here.
Actually, more I comment. Thanks, Philip, for the... It should work. Thanks, Philip, for the presentation. Very interesting. I think we have discussed a couple of times already what are the points we can go ahead with eduroam in the US. And I think looking through your points, it is really improving now, because we have a number of answers to the questions you raised. One is also on the CA field. We are currently, for the RADSEC, we are using the EduGain certification authority. And what we are just trying to solve is the problem to have a repository of certification authorities. So we are trying to find the requirements where any CA can join the club. And then we can also bring the certification worlds together. But we can talk on the break, probably.
And so another solution to one of the questions.
Several princes here. So you will have a fairy tale end, but
it is like a fairy tale.
Any more questions to Philip? Comments?
Yes.
From neighboring country?
That's right.
So for those of you who don't know me, Jan Sweizer from University of British Columbia, and we're just bringing up eduroam in Canada. And hopefully some of the successes that we're having in bringing eduroam up in a neighboring country will allow us to be, if not the prince to Sleeping Beauty, maybe a duke or a count. But I'd just like to one suggestion in your presentation that I think is really worth following up is to find a regional network, to find a group where there already is a close collaboration, where there is more of a roaming presence between institutions. That's how we were able to do things successfully in Canada, was by, again, initially working on eduroam within a provincial regional within a provincial research and education network, not trying to do the entire country, considering that the U.S. The size of the U.S. and the number of educational institutions in the U.S. is larger than all of the rest of our countries put together. I think by concentrating on a place where there already is mobility and there already is a built-up community of collaboration, I think that may be one of the keys for moving this forward. And certainly whatever role that we can play in helping, as I know the rest of the eduroam community will certainly be there to support that.
So you don't think we need any aristocracy to that? No?
Are there any more questions? Yeah, there are two back.
Hello, Alex Reid from ARNet in Australia. You've mentioned that you want to see in the US implementation of eduroam by clients as easy as PPP. I think it is already easier. Somebody set up eduroam on my laptop some years ago and it just worked. Recently I changed my laptop and I had to set it up myself. I found it easier than setting up PPP on my modem at home. So I think it's already there.
What client were you using?
I don't know. I just follow the cookbook.
You must be using MS Chap v2.
There was another question. Yes.
Yes, Matthew Gast. I would like to point out that a couple of hotspot networks in the U.S. actually do deploy 802.1x, but they don't widely advertise the fact.
So hopefully it will be contagious.
I've been hoping that for several years.
Okay. So there are some princes locally.
More princes, yes.
Yeah, some more questions, comments? If not, then thank you very much. This closes the day. Don't forget about filling in the questionnaires. Tell us how good the program is and the rest of the conference, and see you at the gala event. Thank you.